All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? We've reviewed now Michael Collins and, of course, the Stiff Little Fingers album. And, of course, I'm always researching Irish nationalist causes. Every day before I go to sleep, I always say 26 plus 6 equals 1. I say up the RA, all that, right? But I was looking the other day and I was really hungry when doing research on it. So I looked up hunger and then I was thinking, maybe I should add Irish at the end of it. And it turns out there's a movie about this very subject that I always think about and we're doing a series on called Hunger. Have you heard of it?
I had not, Taylor, and I want you to know that I was very excited. Somehow, I dodged the bullet of missing this movie, and I don't know how I let it get away from me, but I've got to say that I made a great escape into seeing this movie. That's a different Steve McQueen. I'm sorry.
So
Never mind. Okay, fuck this. Movie sucked.
So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the review here, which is the Michael Fassbender and Steve McQueen, but not that Steve McQueen movie, Hunger. But before we get into our review this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Cringe Millennial Moment of the Week! Woo! Yeah! All right. And you know what? Of course, last time I did the cringe millennial, cringe generational segment, I did it on a unionist individual. But let's talk about a cringe generational segment from the nationalist side. So this week, Brian, I want to talk about Jerry Adams, who was, the former head of Sinn Féin, and his famous Django Unchained tweet. Now, Brian, are you familiar with Jerry Adams' Django Unchained tweet?
No, but this sounds great.
Oh, it is. Honestly, Brian, it is absolutely fantastic. So, Jerry Adams' N-word tweet, as I'm going to call it because that is what it was, but Jerry Adams watched the movie Django Unchained, and he decided to have a very choice quote, very choice tweet after watching the movie. So, the article that I found is from the BBC, no, I'm sorry, not the BBC, The Guardian, where the header of the article is, Jerry Adams defends N-word tweet. The body of the article says, Sinn Féin's president, well, once again, former president now, Jerry Adams has apologized for using the N-word in a tweet while watching Django Unchained, Quentin Tarantino's film about racism and slavery in America. Adams later deleted the tweet, but one of the few black Irish Republicans from Sinn Féin leaders' West Belfast base also criticized his comparison with nationalists in Northern Ireland to the plight of black American slaves. And I'm not going to say what the actual tweet is for obvious reasons, but a frequent user of Twitter, Adams tweeted on Sunday night, quote, watching Django Unchained, a real Ballymurphy N-word. And he says the whole N-word, not censored.
I guess, just what did he expect the response to that to be,
It's interesting. But no, honestly, I have no idea what he thought he was posting this to, because, it's crazy. Jerry Adams is a left-wing individual, right? He obviously understands, black American history, because he talks about his influences being a lot of black American civil rights leaders and stuff like that. You think he would know this?
Naturally. Well, that's why I'm kind of what do you think thought he was going to, sound it down? He was going to be oh, I'm using it, but, in a way that they're going to I'm going to, you know what I mean? Did he think it was going to be, endearing? To maybe to black people? I don't, because you'd think considering that he's a unionist or a Republican rather, and who he is, what did he expect if he was kind of a right-wing grift guy? It's yeah, they say that word because it riles up people that like them, but he had to have, you would think he would know that kind of his base wasn't going to respond to that kindly.
Well, Brian, we're talking about obviously the cringe millennial and generational segment here. So I got a hilarious reason for why he did it, and it's the next sentence here. The use of the word has provoked a storm of controversy in Ireland and beyond, but Adams initially insisted he was using the word ironically, so he's using ironic racism like millennials do.
But what's the irony? Also that's a stupid thing to do in this day and age, but why? Theoretically, if you're doing something ironically, there's a point you're making.
So here's his actual reason. I don't think it makes any sense, but here's his reason. So Adams defended his attempt to compare the situation of Irish nationalists in Northern Ireland with African-American history. He said, quote, I stand over the context and main point of my tweet, which were the parallels between people in struggle. Like African-Americans, Irish nationalists were denied basic rights. I have long been inspired by Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Rosa Parks, MLK Jr., and Malcolm X.
Sure.
Who stood up for themselves and for justice, which, okay, true, but you still don't need to drop the N-word when saying that, okay?
Well, I feel like this is a thing that just in general, like, and I don't want to get into, I'm not trying to do some like the thing with white leftist thing. Like, as a pair of white leftist, I'm not interested in going there. I'm not the best person to, but there is like a thing where there isn't really any other situation in the history of the world that is quite like the chattel slavery system that the United States was built on. It's kind of like drawing comparisons to like the Holocaust, where unless it's like an actual really direct comparison, you probably shouldn't do it. And I'm not trying to do some like, like I think he just made a stupid tweet, to be honest, but it's kind of like I get what he's doing, I guess, but like people don't like that. It's not the same. You can draw comparisons, but like there's a, obviously we're not the people that say it. There's a very specific, like behind that word in a way that's different from pretty much any other slur. There's a different like history to it to just say it, I don't know, man. I don't think it's like the worst thing ever. I think it's mostly stupid and like embarrassing. Like I hope it didn't like end his life or destroy his life. But of course people didn't like this, you dumbass.
Well, what's interesting is that they actually talked to a black Irish Republican who was actually held in Mace prison, which is going to be the subject of the movie we're going to talk about in a little bit. And his quote is interesting. So Jerry and Sinn Féin won't need to tell me just how toxic it is and the sort of reactions it gets. I don't think that you can equate what was happening in Belfast in 1965 with slavery, Brannigan said. The gentleman, his name was Tim Brannigan. And I think it's interesting, right? Because they got a guy who is involved both in the nationalist struggle and somebody who's also black to talk about it. That was a great person to talk to about this specific thing.
And what he says, like, as I'm reading this, is like, those aren't the same situation, that it's maybe a little glib to compare them. Not that they both aren't important or whatever, but, kind of seems like the initial tweet, other than kind of trying to be, I think, edgy and kind of funny in an embarrassing millennial way, was just like making a kind of a facile comparison, maybe.
No, 100%. And also, this article doesn't talk about it, but he also later went on to be like, well, I decided to do it too because Irish people in America were slaves too. So he did the Irish slavery myth on top of it.
Don't say that, man. That's like, that's not a thing that people in America that say that are not cool.
No, they are not. They are actively trying to diminish chattel slavery in America.
I mean, like, you might hear that differently in Ireland, but in America, that's the only context where you're ever going to hear that. Ever.
No, 100%. So I thought this was a very funny article to talk about. To be fair, especially in comparison to the last guy that we did, who was a decades-long rapist, whereas this guy just made a shitty tweet once. It's a lot better. To be fair, I will say, though, Jerry Adams was almost certainly involved in murders. So he's not like an incredibly wholesome figure. And also his brother went to prison for the rest of his life for raping their daughter. So you know what?
All right.
There's some morbidity here.
Family. Yeah.
There's some morbidity there.
I'll say win some, lose some,
Exactly. But, speaking of win some, lose some, I think it leads perfectly into our review here. So once again, this is Hunger. Now, I want to preface this real quick. I actually recorded a review of this on my last podcast, Dick Proles. I think it was the second movie review we ever did for that podcast. And I remember really liking it at the time, and I still love it now, for obvious reasons, of course. But I wanted to review it again because, of course, we're talking about Ireland and all that, right? But I think also a lot of things have changed in Northern Ireland since we reviewed this movie like 5 years ago. I mean, it's crazy how much things have changed in Ireland in 5 years. Since then, Brexit happened, which is, that's a whole can of worms, obviously, because Brexit really was the most prominent on the Irish part of the UK border. And as well, I mean, Sinn Féin are now the leading party in Northern Ireland, and they are the official opposition in the Republic of Ireland since that episode came out. So I want to talk about a lot of that after the movie review, but things politically in Northern Ireland have changed a lot in the last 5 years. So I thought it was time for a good update. So this movie came out in 2008. It was not rated. And, you made the joke about Steve McQueen. So this movie was directed and written by the British director Steve McQueen. And the first trivia fact I had here is this was his first theatrical film, which is crazy because this is an extremely well-made film for a directorial debut.
It's very crafted. You can tell a lot of very deliberate choices throughout the movie.
Exactly, and especially for how limited the budget is, because we'll get into that in a little bit, but like you can see basically every dollar on screen. Like they did a really good job of utilizing all the funds here.
Yes. I mean, it's a pretty stark film, but I don't know, I do feel like it's kind of painstakingly crafted. Like every sound, every cut is maximized for effect.
Exactly, 100%. And this movie was also written by Enda Welsh as well as Steve McQueen. It was produced by Laura Hastings Smith and Robin Gutch. And Steve McQueen, of course, we mentioned earlier, is most well known for The Great Escape. No, I'm kidding. But he's most well known
The Blob.
for yeah, Blob, exactly. But he's most known for either directing, writing, or producing such films and TV shows as, of course, this movie. The movie Shame, 12 Years a Slave, which is undeniably his most important film, I would say, to like the average American audience. Like, that's a movie that people, I think, probably still fucking talk about.
An iconic film, truly.
Truly. He also recently directed a movie called Blitz, and he produced the TV shows Small Axe and Uprising. And Enda Welsh, I almost said Edna, or was it Edna? But it's Enda Walsh. It's a hard name to say for me. I don't know why. Is primarily a playwright. Yeah. Who has done many things, but once again, nothing relevant to this movie. And Laura Hastings Smith is primarily a producer who has done many things, but also nothing relevant to this movie. And Robin Gutch is a producer who's most famous for producing such movies as, of course, this movie, 71, which is another movie about the Troubles, Kill List, and a movie called Submarine. I don't think there was a yellow submarine in it, but it's just called Submarine.
Jip.
Absolute fucking chip, 100%. This movie is 96 minutes long, and it had a budget of roughly about 1.94 million US dollars, and it grossed roughly $3.185 million. Now, I had to convert that into dollars from pounds, and that was at the time, so who the hell knows? But either way, this movie was not a giant box office success, but it also didn't lose a shit ton of money either. And next trivia fact I had here is this film was shot entirely in Belfast and Maze Prison, so they actually used the actual location of the events of the film, which obviously adds a lot of visceral horror to this movie as well, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's a real sense of like isolation to this movie. Truly a feeling of entrapment.
Entrapment, claustrophobia, like filth and degradation. Yeah. And to be fair, I mean, the prison had been closed years before they made this movie, so it's not like they were in like an actively used prison either. So.
Oh, yeah.
And then this movie on Rotten Tomatoes has a 90% critic score and an 83% audience score. So, of course, critics and audiences like this film. And then let's get into the synopsis here. Now, there's not a lot of narrative synopsis in this film outside of one crucial scene. But otherwise than that, a lot of this movie is told almost exclusively in environmental storytelling, which I appreciate a lot.
It's very well done. This is going to sound stupid. It's definitely not an American production.
No! This is aggressively European. And I mean that in the best way possible. This is aggressively European. So once again, as I mentioned, this movie takes place in 1981 in Northern Ireland. The British government has withdrawn political status from all paramilitary prisoners. Irish Republicans in the Maze and Long Kesh prison are on a no-wash and blanket protest. Now, before we continue on the synopsis here, that was
I'm on one of those
concise.
Too.
Yeah. Basically, every Zoomer is on that right now. Every neat Zoomer is on that right now. They're protesting they can't get all the nuggies that they want.
Yeah, for about 5 years they've been on it.
But I want to have a little context here. So I think it was either 79, 1980, or 1981. But either way, the IRA were incarcerated mostly in Maze and Long Kesh, and of course throughout prisons all across Northern Ireland. And I'm assuming it was in the UK as well. Proper UK, I should say. And they wanted to be seen as prisoners of war, which they saw themselves, of course. And I think history has proven this true, is that it was a conflict that was sectarian, but they weren't just purely terrorists. They were people trying to get a political cause done. So they saw themselves as an army fighting a war. So they wanted to be seen as POWs. And the British government saw them as nothing but common criminals. That's what they saw them as.
The classic thing with like, and not even getting into personal politics or moralism or whatever. The difference between like a terrorist and a prisoner of war is literally dependent on like which side you're on. There's no like objective measure that differentiates one or the other, if we're being honest.
No, that's totally a fair point. But like I said, the IRA and the Nationalists considered themselves an army fighting a war for independence and reunification, essentially. And the British government saw them as nothing but common criminals. So they wanted to treat them as common criminals by making them wear prison garb, making them work, not being allowed to, organize and work together for a common cause. And there were a couple other parts of the negotiation that I can't remember off the top of my head, but I could probably look that up in a little bit. But either way, they were fighting essentially to be treated as prisoners of war. And the no wash and blanket protests. So in this movie, prisoners are shown literally caking their cells in shit and using rotten food and piss as a weapon of essentially biological warfare. Now, Brian, I found the photos of the actual like news reports of this happening at the time, and this movie's pretty accurate. I'll just say that to how it looked. So it was, I'm not going to show any pictures.
It looks pretty accurate. So this is probably a good time to get into the most striking thing to me about this movie in comparison to, the first film we reviewed in this series, Michael Collins. If you'll remember, I think from a filmmaking viewpoint, our big takeaway on that is that even though Michael Collins is such an pretty uncompromisingly radical film, it's very much constructed in a way to be like an accessible narrative kind of like mainstream movie, which is to its credit, but it's kind of interesting, right? Hunger does not do that. Whereas I kind of think that, like we were talking about, you could show an American Michael Collins who is pretty ignorant of the troubles of Irish history, and they might just like it as a film because, again, I think the way it's structured is pretty mainstream. This movie is really, really unflinching, and the point primarily is to put you in that situation, like the feeling of like degradation and of like sacrifice being made as close as you can get by watching a movie. And I gotta say, all the shit and all the piss looks pretty accurate, looks pretty real. Doesn't look like chocolate and lemonade.
It really doesn't. But yeah, so that was essentially what was going on, is they were essentially using their biological weapons to basically annoy the British, obviously the Ulster pieces of shit, to try to change this. Because listen, as somebody who worked in a prison at one point, if it was me, it would be like 3 days of this and I'd be like, just give them everything they want. It smells like shit in here. Please stop. That would be fucking me. Like, Jesus Christ, seriously.
But the British are eating all that awful food all the time.
Oh yeah, they love it. I read an article today that was something like 20% of British workers like eat food in the bathroom at work, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, their food is so terrible, they might as well eat it in the bathroom where it's like farts and poop everywhere.
It's insane.
It tastes the exact same. And I can say that because
in the bathroom.
Listen, I can say that as somebody who's been to the UK, all right? The food there is mid at best. I can say that.
It looked pretty mid. Every time I read about it, it sounds mid.
Yeah. But the actual first scene here. So, prison officer Raymond Lowen, played by Stuart Graham, prepares to leave for work, cleaning his wounded knuckles and checking his car for bombs. Now, once again, this is a scene that has basically no dialogue at all. It's just a guy, like, washing his hands, getting ready for work. He thanks his wife for breakfast, leaves, checks his car, and then he goes to work and is, like, pissed off that he has to go to work. Like, there was, like, 5 words in there, but there was an entire story being told there. Like, it was awesome. I loved it. Like,
yeah.
The palpable fear, obviously, of, paramilitary forces murdering you, the like Protestant fucking like demure like fucking housewife ethic going on there, like the idea of just being mad that you have to go to your shitty job every day where you have to brutalize people, like it's amazing.
The constant fear, but it's also the feeling of like the mundanity of it, right? The idea that this guy's just like, he's going to work, this is his day, this is his morning, he's checking for fucking bombs under his car, and he's just well, I'm back to the salt mines or whatever the fuck.
Yeah, I'm back to the beating up Irish mines.
Yep. Boy, rough day at the office today.
A new IR inmate, Davy Gillen, played by the actor Brian Milligan, is admitted and categorized as a quote-unquote non-conforming prisoner for his refusal to wear the prison uniform. He is sent to his cell naked except for a blanket. That's, of course, the blanket process they were talking about. His cellmate, Jerry Campbell, played by the actor Liam McMahon, has smeared the walls with excrement from floor to ceiling as part of the no-wash protest. And you know what? I gotta say, Brian, cleanest first-time apartment. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. He's living his best life. He's decorating.
Yeah, the cleanest college apartment. Prison officers forcibly and violently remove the prisoners from their cells and beat them before pinning them down to cut their long hair and beards, as once again, that was part of the no-wash protest. Now, as somebody, once again, who worked in prison, this kind of stuff would absolutely happen in a modern American prison. Like, there's a guy who's stinky, doesn't want to bathe, is being very disruptive, and at some point, they would get so like, unkempt that they would literally force them to do this. Like, and it's so awful in a lot of ways, too, because it's like, it takes away even the little bodily autonomy that inmates have. Like, they're forced to be here.
Because it's not right, if I'm, interpreting this right, it's not really about them being unkempt, right? It's about the fact that they're doing any sort of small personal insubordination is like unacceptable.
Yeah, because they want to keep, obviously, they obviously want to break the spirits of these, like, revolutionary fighters. And then on top of it, they don't want them to have any autonomy because then they might ask for more. Like, that's the idea of basically all
Right. You can't
correctional
let them
institutions.
have that little bit because then that opens the opportunity for them to continue fighting for more. You have to squash anything.
Exactly. The prisoners resist with prisoner Bobby Sands, played by Michael Fassbender. And the next trivia fact I had here is Michael Fassbender had to go on a medically monitored crash diet to portray Bobby Sands. And we will certainly
Oh my
get to
God.
the end. Yeah, he's pretty skinny at the end of this movie.
Did you read about what his diet was like, what he agreed on?
Yeah, wasn't it like apples and like a can of tuna or some shit like that?
Tuna and nuts, basically.
That was it. That was it. That's like the David Bowie diet from the 70s. Well, no cocaine, though. He did. I don't think he was on cocaine that we're aware of, but he might have been. Oh, God.
No,
but then during this also...
by the end of the movie...
Yeah. Well, I'm surprised, Brian, you didn't look at that and you're like, man, body goals.
The thing is, so when I was really skinny around 2019, everyone told me that they were, well, not everyone, but like people on the street would ask me if I was okay. And I was like, yeah, I'm great. I feel great.
Yeah.
But this isn't a joke. For a while, I weighed like 120 pounds, and I'm about 6'1". And people that knew me were like, "Oh, that's fine, that's fine." But sometimes people that I worked with would be like, "Hey, are you okay?" Or like strangers on the street would offer to buy me food. I remember one time this one guy was like, "Hey, do you want a burger?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "Okay," because you're like, "You look sick, dude." And I was like, "Thanks."
That's fucking hilarious. I'm gonna be honest.
I mean, I felt great, man.
Oh, I was talking about the burger guy. That guy rocks, honestly. Like, good for that
No,
guy.
he's a good guy. He's a good guy, I guess.
Geez. But then Bobby Sands during this altercation spits into Lowen's face, and he responds by punching Sands in the face and then swings again, only to miss and punch the wall. Which is, of course, how we got the fucking knuckle scene from the beginning. If you didn't obviously guess what it was by now, but still,
Yeah.
like... And then, of course, he cuts Bobby Sands' hair, throws it back in the cell, and they clean the cells again because, like, you know, once again, they can't have a cell covered in, or the entire prison covered in literal shit and piss and rotten food. They got to clean it eventually. That's their idea of it.
Through all of this, there's been maybe a handful of words uttered and almost no music, almost no score, and incredible sound design in this film.
Yes, 100%.
Like,
there is some great sound design here.
Knuckle hit, every like pained breath that someone takes, every club to skin, the sound of feet shuffling across like the concrete floors, you hear all of that with really crisp kind of clarity. And there is almost no music, almost no dialogue.
No, 100%. The sound design and the production design in general in this movie is absolutely fucking fantastic. And then later on, you know, of course, as a concession, quote unquote, they give them like shitty secondhand civilian clothing, not their actual clothing. And they do another bit of a prison riot here. And then the gauntlet scene. Now, Brian, this is obviously not the most famous scene from this movie, but this is like the most viscerally upsetting scene in the whole movie.
Yeah, so this is actually, and again, it's upsetting to see, but again, the sound of it for me is unnerving. Just the sound of banging on concrete and banging on, that's the thing. What I remember about this movie that stuck with me for hours after watching it is the sound of beating on skin, which is a very distinct sound you hear throughout this movie.
Yes. So just to give a little context here. So the prisoners are essentially given cavity searches and humiliated. They're made to go through the gauntlet, which is like, obviously they're thrown through a series of guys with like batons, like SWAT officers with like batons and shields. And you once again talk about how they're like beating on the shields as like an orchestral score on top of the
like a
violence here.
tribal kind of like chant almost.
Yes, 100%. And once again, they're cavity searched. They have their mouths searched with the same gloves that they're like, were just probed with. Like, it's just, and then one guy like spits in the face of one of the officers and he beats him like 20 times with the baton. And then you also see one of the SWAT officers like crying in the background as the contrast between what these people have been obviously willing to do and the one, I guess, conscious objector in this. Although I will say, I understand why that's there thematically. But if you're in this situation, you're a SWAT officer in this kind of sectarian conflict, this person would have gotten let go of a long time ago.
Well,
they would
that's
have
the
not
thing
gotten
is,
to this point.
Like, I don't doubt that person exists, but they would be so humiliated by their peers. They would be so ostracized or just disregarded. They would just be gone. That it's not like, I don't know. I don't have a problem with it, I guess, because I don't think it's trying to
I don't
say
either.
it, but some of the guards were actually good guys because this guy isn't good. It's more like this would do this to anyone because the level of like depravity that these guys have to commit is so great to commit on your fellow man that it is going to make a few people crack. You know, that's a famous thing. I mean, I don't know if we should get into that, but fascists throughout history have reported how how having to keep their own men from feeling guilty, because that's one of the great problems of fascism. When you from fascism's own perspective, is how do we keep our people from feeling basic human empathy?
Well, and that's the thing is that, and I'll get into just a little bit of it, but we won't get into the depraved, obviously, conclusions of it ultimately. But that's the reason why the gas chambers were created, because for a long time it was the ITOTS group and killing people in the, fucking Polish and Ukrainian hinterlands or whatever. And it demoralized so many of them that they started killing themselves and
they were like, well, we need to automate this. We need to depersonalize it.
Exactly. So once again, it's not saying that this guy wouldn't have existed, because he clearly could have, but if they'd gotten this far along in the process, there wouldn't be guys crying in the corner being like, I can't do this. They would have quit or gotten fired a long time ago. I'm gonna be honest
at the very least, they would have been doing that after work. Like,
yes.
At their
Absolutely.
That's maybe possible.
Yeah, they would have went to their wife and been like, I can't fucking do this anymore or something. You know, like, yeah. But either way, I understand why it was done as a contrast, but I think just a tad bit unrealistic in that moment. But that's not here or there. That's not a fault of this movie. Obviously, it's just, it's a thing. And then one of my favorite scenes in this movie, so Lowen visits his catatonic mother in a retirement home, and he is then shot in the back of the head, which is also a great scene, by the way. Because, like, the contrast between the catatonic mother and everybody screaming and running away, and there's, like, blood all over, it's a wild scene. It's wild.
So this scene, if it were in a different movie, would feel like a crazy 70s exploitation, like crime thriller scene. Because it's in this movie, it's just really just depressing and bleak. But the way it's staged is, if it were in a different type of movie, I could see myself being like, whoa, man, that shit's crazy.
No, and the fact it's a period piece, too, it would have fit right into, like, a very early 80s, late 70s, like fucking Grindhouse-style exploitation movie.
But, of course, that is not, and I know that's not the type of movie this is, so that's not the way it resonates. But that is how it just reminded me of that, though.
No, it's very funny. And then the next scene here is Sands is visited by Father Dominic Morin, played by the actor Liam Cunningham, and they discuss the morality of a hunger strike. Now, this is easily the most famous scene in the movie. It is a 17-minute, 10-second long continuous shot where they once again essentially argue the morality and efficacy of the hunger strike. And they were able to do this in 4 takes. Isn't that crazy?
Incredible.
They did this in 4 takes.
This is an insane scene, because it's literally almost 20 minutes of 2 guys talking, and it is so fucking compelling.
It is. It throws you back to that time period of, like, 2 people literally arguing about political, efficacy. Like, you believe it, every bit of it. It's fantastic.
This is the other thing when we talk about this being thoroughly European and just not an American movie, is that the filmmakers are willing to just give you a scene that is like a nuanced discussion on the morals and ethics and themes of this movie. And they don't really hold your hand through them. They don't, like, have the characters say really obvious kind of, like, MCU type, well, this is good and this is bad type of things. They have, like, a in-depth conversation about these things, and they trust that you, through what you've seen, but also just through the performances, will understand what's being discussed, which American films just do not do.
No, exactly. There's nobody, like, banging their hand on the table going, what the fuck is wrong with you? What are you doing?
You can't hunger strike. And when you're like, I need to hunger strike for freedom.
You motherfucking bitch ass cunt. You can't do
You are being such a fuckwaffle right now.
They should get Tom Jorgensen to write European movies. That'd be so awesome.
Oh my god. Who's the Ready Player One fucker?
Ernest Cline,
that's it.
Yeah.
You are acting just like, I don't know, who's an asshole in me. You are being like Voldemort right now by not letting me hunger strike.
You're being a real Michelangelo to the IRA's TMNT, Bobby.
I'm sort of like the Michelangelo of the IRA.
Yo, bro, you're gonna fucking starve to death and die? What the fuck? That's so cringe, bro.
I'm thinking it's time for a hunger strike.
Oh, Jesus fucking Christ. But anyway,
we should rewrite this movie.
Yes, we should.
Be better.
But so Bobby and about 75 total IRA soldiers decide to do the hunger strike. Now, the rest of the movie is literally him starving to death. So there's not much plot after this. It's literally him just starving to death and slowly dying. Although there's a couple interesting scenes. So there is a physician who is, I would say, probably the most humanistic character of anybody in this prison outside of the inmates. He's somebody that obviously has deep human empathy and he cares quite a bit. There's basically no dialogue with him other than a bit of narration. and that describes
Yeah.
basically his dying status. And there is also a orderly who has the tattoo UDA on his knuckles, which was the Ulster Defense Alliance, or I think it's Ulster Defense Association, which was a unionist paramilitary gang. So when he tries to get up and fight him, but he's too weak, he can't even do it. He just falls on the floor.
Not like a state thing, like right-wing street gang.
Essentially, but they were a little bit more organized than that. And
but
they still
like
exist.
The equivalent to like a pre-World War II like German like street gang, like that. When I say street gang, something like that.
Yes. That's a good way to put it. 100%. Not quite official, but definitely wink, wink. We don't hate you.
Yeah.
Like,
That's
for the government paramilitary gang, right-wing death squad.
Probably very protected. Yep.
Well, I don't know quite death squad because they weren't like purposefully like just going out and murdering nationalists.
Beat up squads.
Yeah, beat up squads. Yes, that's a good way to put it. But yeah,
the
so
name
he's
of
got
my hardcore band.
Yeah. The beat up squad, hell yeah, dude. But yeah, so you see that, and of course the contrast between the obviously, in this moment, very well-fed and obviously protected member of the state versus the guy who's literally dying and is fighting a war of independence. And of course he can't handle it, so yeah, passes out from that. And then there's some flashback stuff. He meets his parents, and then Bobby Sands just starves to death and dies after 66 days. And then there is a bit of a textual epilogue that reveals that Sands was elected to the UK Parliament as an MP for the Fermanagh and South Tyrone while he was on hunger strike. By the way, it's once again, and I think we can describe it. I don't know if it's quite cringe millennial, cringe generational segment, but I think we can both agree that if we ever do a cringe generational person of the decade, Margaret Thatcher would absolutely be there. What a wretched cunt. What a
my God, and she was
fucking
cringe,
cunt.
Though. It's like, yeah,
very cringe.
Fucking monster, just a demon, but also fucking embarrassing. I was actually just thinking about the no such thing as society quote. It's such a nonsense, stupid thing to say, and she thought it was so fucking clever. She's like fucking Churchill, or Reagan. They all say this dumb shit that barely makes sense, and when it does make sense, it betrays their most evil impulses, but they think it's so fucking smart.
Yeah, absolute fucking nonsense. And the reason I wanted to talk about Margaret Thatcher is because there's several sound bites of her talking about what the events of this movie are essentially about, or I should say the context behind them. And once again, she's so cringe. She sucked so hard. She was, she talked about how Bobby Sands and the IRA protesters were essentially committing suicide, which, that's one way I guess you could describe martyrdom, because that's how they saw it.
It's nothing that anyone was doing to them. No, it was a suicide.
Yes. Well, that's the thing, Brian, is that everything in Northern Ireland was so great. I mean, we listened to that fucking Stiff Little Fingers album. Everything was going
they were so happy.
All the songs were like, we love living in Belfast.
I'm having a good time, hanging out with lots of money and friends.
And we all have jobs.
Like the undertones.
But yeah, so either way.
Never mind, there is an Irish punk band like that.
Yeah. But yeah, so of course we wanted to talk about Margaret Thatcher because honestly, that wretched cunt, I'm so glad she's in hell. She's burning in hell, and we're very happy about it. If a hell exists, she's definitely in there, for sure. And then, so the total epilogue, of course, I mentioned earlier. So 9 other men died in the IRA hunger strike, a total of 10 before it was eventually called off, where basically all of the demands that they asked for at the beginning of the film were granted without the political status, because of course that was the one that was basically like, yeah, we're not going to let you, we're not going to let you be POWs, but they gave them basically everything else they asked for.
They had to cut it off at political status because, of course, that opens up a whole different window of opportunities and possibilities and precedents that they just were not going to allow.
Exactly. So, but yeah, so that is the end of the movie. And before we get to our Amazon reviews, and the Amazon reviews are hilarious, Brian. I only included one unionist. I wanted to only include one unionist. But I want to talk a little bit about his legacy, because his legacy is absolutely fucking hilarious. Because Bobby Sands' name has been put on so many memorials and so many streets, including in Iran, where the British embassy on the street where it was renamed Bobby Sands Street.
Really?
Yeah, to piss off the Brits, which is awesome.
Based!
Yeah, so fucking based. And also in, I think it was Providence, Rhode Island last year. Yes, in Providence, Rhode Island, they made a monument to him last year. Isn't that fucking wild? Oh, God. And also,
does anyone in Rhode Island know what it is? Like, why Rhode Island?
I mean, it's the Northeast. There's a lot of Irish Americans in the Northeast. That's what
All
I'm
right,
guessing.
yeah, okay.
Well, in Hartford, Connecticut, there was one set up in 1997. So that was like a little bit closer. And of course, that was around the time of the Good Friday Agreement was coming into fruition. So that one makes more sense. But 2023 is a little weird for any American city to have a Bobby Sands memorial. But hey, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool, whatever. It's just kind of strange, you know?
And also, New Jersey, it doesn't say which year, but the New Jersey General Assembly, which is like basically the Congress of the state of New Jersey, voted 34-29 for a resolution honoring his courage and commitment, which is, it's insane, isn't it? Like, that's insane. Like, that would never happen nowadays.
Funny to just say courage and commitment as if it's like a non-controversial thing, you know?
No, totally. But also, once again, Margaret Thatcher talks in her quote about, like, these are all extremists and blah, blah, blah. But here's the thing, right, is that a guy who was an inmate who had a 14-year prison sentence, by the way, so that's a pretty significant sentence for anywhere outside of the U.S., especially in Europe. But on top of it, he was actively on hunger strike when he won a seat in Parliament. That tells me they liked him quite a bit in his home district. They liked him a lot. At least the largest plurality of people in that election were like, yeah, this starving felon in prison, that guy absolutely deserves to be in Parliament. They must like him a lot.
Which really does say a lot about the living condition of that country.
Well, what's interesting is that the guy after that, too, was also one of the hunger strikers. He's the guy that succeeded him after Bobby Sands died. So, like, yeah, people in that home district liked him quite a bit. So he clearly wasn't that much of an extremist if they liked him that much.
Yeah, if the average baseline citizen feels that way, it's not extremism.
Yeah, that would be like if, like, Asada Shakur, if she was still in prison, got elected to, like, the Congress or something like that. Like, people must have liked her quite a bit if that was to happen, all right?
Not extremism, it's representation.
Yes, exactly. Oh, God. But yeah, so once again, rest in peace, Bobby Sands. You did a lot of good. And also, another impact I totally forgot to mention, like, the IRA hunger strike in the Maze and Long Kesh really, like, ratcheted up IRA recruitment efforts and led to, once again, Sinn Féin being the major political party in both the Republic and the North that it is today. So, and also on top of it, getting rid of the hard border in Northern Ireland, getting nationalists a seat at the table of government, of course, getting the Irish language recognized in Northern Ireland as of just a couple of years ago, and getting Northern Ireland and Ireland far more integrated than they were before this. So Bobby Sands legitimately, and I'm saying this as non-cringely as possible, you did a great fucking job, and I think your legacy is very much secured, 100%.
Yeah, I think when watching this movie, there are moments where it feels so harsh, and you're going like, oh, this is hard to watch, but it's with the understanding, I guess, that this was not all for naught, that truly this led to, like, incredible changes that people thought would never happen, or at least was part of leading to those changes.
And I guess the ultimate change I want to talk about is it eventually made Jerry Adams famous enough to where when he dropped the N-word on Twitter, people noticed it.
And they cared.
We were talking about, obviously, about Michael Collins earlier, and obviously the fact that he was the leader of his own country and did so much by the age of 31. Bobby Sands died at 27 years old. He died at 27 years old. He did this much in his life.
We gotta get it together.
His impact was so massive at 27 years old. I mean, Jesus Christ. But
did he have a podcast? No.
He did not. He did not.
Loser.
Well, speaking of big losers, I think it leads perfectly into our Amazon reviews, Brian. Oh, man. These were such good Amazon reviews. I was so excited to get to these Amazon reviews. Once again, though, there were only 2 unionists I found in the 1-star section, but I included 1. I didn't want to do too many unionists. Although one of the guys, I'm not sure if he was quite a unionist. I mean, he definitely was a unionist, but he was more of like the think of the children kind of unionist, whereas I got the one who was not so much that. I found them more like, the guy with the guy with the UDA tattoo on his knuckles. That's probably the guy I found. But let's get into a positive review here. So Annie Abbott gives us 5 stars, and the head of the review says, as close to fact as possible so long after the events. And the body of the review says, having read some of the other reviews, I cannot connect to any of those who viewed this as quote-unquote art. This was life in the maze and Long Kesh for those suspected of IRA involvement in the 70s and early 80s. I was not a prisoner, but I knew many friends and family members of those who were, and what is depicted in this film is as close to truth as it gets. It was brutal. It was inhuman. It was wrong, and to this day, the British will try to defend it as they spent 35 years defending how their soldiers murdered innocent civilians in Derry on Bloody Sunday by saying the British Army was under attack by the IRA. A fact long denied and finally admitted to by the British government, which is very true, by the way. The Ballymurphy thing that Jerry Adams was talking about was literally just admitted admitted like a year ago. They finally admitted it a year ago. That's it. And it happened 50 years ago.
We can finally put that to bed.
Well, that's the thing. We talk about the impact. Maybe Jerry Adams' ultimate impact was them looking into it. Like, actually, the thing that happened at Ballymurphy was awful.
Crazy.
Maybe.
Oh, wow, sorry. Guys, we really dropped the ball.
It was 2021. But still, like, Jesus Christ. I cheered when the sadistic prison guard was shot as he visited his mother. Wow, this Amazon reviewer is getting real bloodthirsty, which, to be fair, I understand. Awesome. I understand that. But had someone asked, I would have gladly done it myself. So we got a tough guy here. Yes. Or tough lady. I'm not sure. Annie? I don't know.
Yeah, this guy fucking rules. You better not make him cry. You fuck with him, or if you fuck with his friends, you are really in trouble.
Now we complain about the cruelty and brutality of ISIS. Then we who have lived under the yoke of British occupation, the same complaints about the British Army. All that has changed is the locale and the name. I watched this film and cried when those men were beaten and subjected to such dehumanizing treatment, which I do agree. It is once again a scene where if you were to cry during it, I totally get it. It is an awful scene to watch. All those scenes are awful to watch, like genuinely. Very heartbreaking. And my heart soared when I remembered the sacrifice, in parentheses, not suicide by the way, but an ancient form of Celtic protest, of those 10 young men and all the others who came before and after. My special prayer was to have 10 minutes alone in a locked room with Margaret Thatcher, and I would have gladly shown her what crime really was. Oh my God, this is so based.
I hate Margaret Thatcher, and yeah. But 10 minutes alone. That fucking Pantera song, but it's on Margaret Thatcher.
To be honest with you, well, Phil Anselmo is a fascist, so I don't know which side.
Yeah, he's a big dumbass piece of shit. Okay, so he's
an American fascist, though, so he might have been, like, anti-unionist.
No, he's too dumb. I think you're giving him too much credit. He doesn't like Thatcher because he probably listens to, like, 80s punk bands like GBH and The Exploited. So he's just like, yeah, fuck Thatcher and Reagan, but he doesn't, like, know that they're bad. That's the Phil Anselmo take on Thatcher. I guarantee it.
Yes. And to finish out the review here, am I bitter? Bet your bum. Most of the comments to this film
bet your bum. You bet your bippy.
That few really had any concept of what occurred during this period in Irish history. If only they knew how close to true it is. Is this, by the way, is this like based nationalist here, or is this, well, Irish nationalist, to be very cleir, or is this like internet tough guy? Which one?
It's both. It's both. Like, he's an old guy, so he probably is a based nationalist. So I feel like the thing with a lot of, especially if he's like an older Gen Xer or a boomer, it's like they don't know how embarrassing it is to be like that online, you know?
No, absolutely, 100%. But I appreciate it. It's so candid. I love it. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And then, well, speaking of another person who's also very based, so Andrew Bocock gives this 5 stars. Also, by the way, Bocock, great name.
Bocock, great name.
No notes, great name. They give this one 5 stars. And the head of the review says, stunning and practically unmatchable. And the body of the review says, this is hands down one of the best films of the past decade for me. Quote unquote, visual artist Steve McQueen captures a sense of humanity in a way that few directors seem to be in touch with. A telling, powerful story in a fashion that most are afraid to. Now, real quick before I continue on, he was like a painter before this, which makes so much sense why this movie doesn't have that much dialogue in it outside of the...
Interesting. Yeah, that does make sense. I did not know that, but that does kind of put some pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah, so I have to give him a lot of fucking credit there. Because once again, it's, except for the scene, the 17-minute long scene, it's basically all told through environmental storytelling, which I just obviously love that shit 100%.
It does not feel like a feature film debut.
No, it does not. So then finishing up the review here, there is very little dialogue, and the dialogue that exists comes in spouts like a 17-minute long scene where the camera stays still and doesn't cut away at all. It could have easily been pretentious, but it is not in the least. McQueen has proven himself just by this one instance to be an extraordinary visionary that knows how to tell a story vividly without having to quote-unquote tell it. Did I mention the cinematography is gorgeous? Practically everything in Hunger is toned to perfection, and Michael Fassbender's gruelingly tangible performance shows human deterioration at its most believable. A masterpiece. And, you know, you're right about that. You can even though he didn't die or starve to death, like, you can very clearly tell he's very hungry in this movie. Yeah, God. All the bed sores on him and shit, and him, like, puking up blood and shit, and, like,
it's
pissing out brown liquid because he's just so dehydrated.
Guys,
it's rough.
I don't like to see it, to be honest.
No.
I hope that never happens to me. That's all I'll say. No. I don't want to ever go through that.
No, absolutely. I will never go through a hunger strike because I love my veggie tendies too much.
They're so good. And they're good for you.
But, speaking of things that are bad for us, so now we're getting into the cringe reviews, Brian. So this one is not the worst because, once again, we'll get to our unionists in a little bit. But this one is definitely the most, you're going to get mad at this one, Brian. I know that for a fact. So the user, the real Mark, gives this 3 stars. I want to think it's like Mark from fucking The Room.
No.
Oh, hi, Mark. It's the real Mark. No. But he gives us 3 stars. And the head of the review says, interesting but a little boring all the same. And the body of the review says, our tour guide in Belfast mentioned this movie. While probably a more accurate reflection of what occurred during the hunger strike, it's also a bit sickening, saddening, and even boring. For example, why did the producer feel the need to have full frontal nudity? Yes, we know this is common in prison, but still doesn't mean we have to look at that stuff. What cinematic benefit was derived?
Didn't need to see that.
And then there were the beatings and ultimate starvation, which were certainly saddening and a little disgusting. You think? Jesus Christ, what a moron.
Asshole.
But overall, it's a video about a hunger strike, so I guess you have to expect as much. The flashbacks were better points. I mean, they really weren't, actually. Like, they weren't bad, but what are you talking about?
Does this guy understand that this is based... He understands this is a true story.
Yes, this is something that...
kind of seems like he doesn't. He's like, why did they choose to have them be naked all the time?
It was told extremely clinically, and there was, in my opinion, not a lot of dramatization going on. Like, seriously.
No, he's like, I'm confused by all these storytelling choices they made that I felt were pretty gratuitous.
Oh my God, Brian, you're going to love this because this is so American code. Even more, though, so than obviously the American coded part here. Also, it would have been better if there was more about the aftermath than a few words at the end to show some sort of a triumph over a corrupt system, but that's probably asking a little too much of the producer.
This is about real life, man.
And also, listen, even though the nationalists did, I would argue, win in the end, at least they got pretty much everything they wanted in a lot of ways, outside of the obvious full reunification of Ireland. But, like, the immediate aftermath was pretty bad. This was not a thing where it's like, yeah, we won.
It really seems like this person doesn't understand that this is documenting a real event. He's like, why did they make this story so sad?
And it's like, it's because it's a sad-ass story. I don't know.
Yeah, because it fucking sucked.
It was a time where people had to starve to death to get political recognition. That's not generally a very feel-good story.
Yeah, like... No, so he's saying this after watching it because a tour guide in Ireland recommended it to him. Probably because they were trying to relate something about their country's history to him.
Somebody who is interested in the history of the island and is almost certainly a local, talking to somebody about something that's very meaningful to their existence. Be like, I don't know, I thought it was stupid and shitty. Why did it have to portray these events? Because it happened, idiot.
It was kind of a bummer, man. Also, I had to see a ball sack, and I didn't like that.
It reminds me of, once again, that review in Bone Tomahawk where the guy's like, a 5-minute butt scene with a man. And it's like, maybe it's the same guy. And he's like, why'd they have to show a 5-minute butt scene with like a bunch of guys?
Gross. That was gross.
Yeah. That was gross. And then speaking of things that are gross, so our next review here is from Charles M. Bible, which that's also a great name, by the way. That is such a fucking great name, who gives us 1 star. And the head of the review says, 1 star. And the body of the review says, I did not mean to purchase the right to view this movie online. My mistake. Sorry.
This guy rules.
You know, this guy's like 87 years old.
Yeah.
You know
he's like, who's he talking to?
He says sorry to Amazon. I'm sorry I bought this movie, Amazon. He doesn't want a refund. He just didn't mean to, and he said sorry.
I apologize. Sorry for the trouble you two letting me watch it.
Yeah. I don't need a refund. I just want to acknowledge my mistake.
I like this guy so much better than the last guy, though.
Yeah.
This guy seems like he's probably
it's
a sweetheart.
Wholesome. It's so wholesome.
Truly. Sorry, Amazon. Sorry, guys.
But speaking of somebody who's not wholesome here, Brian, here's our unionist, the one I wanted to choose because this was the UDA Knuckles guy. I bet you that was the real guy and he was pissed off that they showed him in the movie, the bad guy, I guarantee you. So this individual is named Bobby Yari, who gives us 1 star. And the head of the review says, no context. And by the way, I know they're a unionist because on Amazon it said from the United Kingdom for the review. So I'm like, there we go.
Oh, good.
And the body of the review says, as a film, it is beautifully shot and presented with some outstanding acting. The conversation between the priest and Bobby Sands is cinematically flawless. The problem is the presentation of the subject. The prisoners did not have their crimes mentioned once, and someone ignorant of history could assume they were victims of internments without trial or lack of due process. Now, even though this person, I know for a fact they're not coming at it from what I feel is the correct perspective, but these individuals did commit commit a lot of, I would argue, pretty heinous acts to get ultimately their freedom.
Sure.
They did kill a lot of people, so I'm not going to diminish that.
Sure. Yeah.
But
sure.
these were not just simply like thrill-killing serial killer murders or attacks that happened. A lot of them were purposefully designed to get some sort of reaction or a message, or also get back at people who are collaborators or perpetrators of other type violence. Okay.
So if you're going to argue that this film is not presenting the context, which is not true, the film is just assuming that the audience already has some knowledge about the subject. But if you're going to complain that this movie doesn't show context for why the prisoners are there, then you yourself aren't presenting context for why those crimes were taking place. And you have to be aware of that. What I would say to this critic.
Yeah, what I would say to this critic as well as, you're dumb. That's what
shut up.
But I'm going to finish it out here. So, secondly, no one stopped the prisoners from using the prison facilities or washing, nor made them live in the disgusting conditions that they did. This was entirely self-imposed hardship.
Why did they want to poop everywhere?
Did Margaret Thatcher write this from the grave? Like, seriously, though.
Nobody made them poop it over themselves.
But honestly, it's one of those things where, once again, like, as somebody who worked in prison, if people were doing these kind of nasty things, unless it was obvious mental illness, they were trying to do something. Like, It wasn't just like, I want to shit everywhere and, like, it just smells like shit and piss and rotten food. They're clearly doing something, especially if it's this organized, they're doing something. Like, it's also one of those things where, and not to get too into the weeds of course, modern day anti-colonial and anti-genocide struggles, but it's the same thing when like Ben Shapiro will be like, oh, well, the Palestinians want to live in filth. They want to live like that. And it's like, no, they don't want to live like that.
No, they're forced to live in that way. They've been localized to this tiny little lodge where they're fucking live. Basically, they're forced to live as treated like subhumans in living conditions no human should have to live in. They don't choose that. That's the only way they can live.
Exactly. And even before the no wash blanket protest, I was reading up on it. These prisoners, and of course, once again, they call themselves POWs, but they saw it as prisoners, right? They were only given a bedpan and a small, like, inch-thick mattress. So if you're given a bedpan and that much, of course it's going to smell bad regardless.
Yeah,
they made these people live in these conditions. They didn't even give them indoor plumbing.
Yeah, they created the conditions in both literally and just in a wider sense. They created the conditions for this type of protest to have to happen. They made it basically a necessity.
Exactly. Apart from a single nurse, every prison official or guard is depicted as a brutal savage. I mean, that's what they were. They were brutal savages. Like, and also the one guy who was crying, I don't know if I'd quite describe him as a brutal savage. I don't know what to tell you on that, so you're objectively wrong.
Because he still took part in it.
But also, I was reading up on the conditions of the Maze and Long Kesh prisons as well, right? Like, they only hired Protestants. And if this is a jail and prison that is basically set up specifically for IRA detainees, and you get unionists only hired, of course they're going to be brutal. Like, I don't know what to fucking tell you. It's a sectarian conflict where one side has the state power and the other one can be brutalized at will. It's only going to encourage getting psychos in there. Like, that's just the fucking reality. Like,
this review is actively, like, I feel like this guy is acting like he knows less about the conflict than he clearly does.
Yes. He's lying on purpose. This individual is lying on purpose, like all colonialists and imperialists do. They're lying on purpose. Historically, it's strange that his election as MP was not mentioned. Well, it is literally mentioned at the end of the movie. Nor the fact that his family could have saved his life at any time. That's literally also mentioned, by the way. They talk about them. They show that in the movie that his family are against this and are visiting him to basically try to tell him at the last minute to save his life. They show that in the movie.
It's a major emotional scene in the film. Yes.
So I know you're not paying attention or purposefully lying. Well, let's be honest. It's the latter. But still, like, come on, man. Like, we have eyes. And then the last sentence here. Oh, we're almost done, I promise. This is a fine effort of turning Bobby Sands into Saint Bobby. But at the end of the day, the man was a terrorist and took his own life. And you know what? The rest of the world disagrees with you. Bobby Sands has been memorialized basically in every way other than becoming an actual saint. So you are objectively wrong. He is an inspiration to anti-colonial struggles everywhere, and including, I believe, the either PFLP or Hamas specifically have talked about Bobby Sands being a inspiration. I think it was Yahya Sinwar who might have said that. Rest in peace, obviously.
Is that because you can see through his actions, through his protests, there are actual measurable positive effects that were a long time coming and took a long time longer, but directly following, like his death.
No, exactly, 100%. So, Mr. Unionist piece of shit, you are wrong and an idiot. And if you die soon, I'm not going to feel bad. I don't want you to die,
Yeah,
but I'm not going to
a
feel bad
bad
about it.
guy. We don't always say this, even though I hate the review section. I hate it. But I don't usually think that the reviews are written by bad people.
This is one of them.
But this is a bad guy.
Yeah, 100%. So, but yes, those are our Amazon reviews. I once again did not want to include The Last Unionist because that one wasn't, that was more of like the liberal unionist. That was just more of like, well, you should have shown both sides and how it was so awful, it was so violent in every way, which, to be fair, it was true, but that was more of like the think of the children kind of guy. So I didn't want to include that one because like probably just a little misguided, fine. But this asshole really deserves our condemnation. So that's why I want to include this one.
A fucking demon.
Yeah, demon, loser, asshole. But speaking of people who aren't, so Bobby Sands, once again, this is Hunger. Before we get to our pluggables, Brian, do we have any final thoughts?
I mean, this is a really harrowing film. They're really rewarding to watch. Obviously, we're in the middle of our series about media and culture, relating to the Troubles in some way. And I would say if that's a subject of interest to you, or just Irish history in general, or even, I guess, like kind of terse, minimal, dramatic cinema, I would recommend this movie. It's very well done. I'm going to say I don't always think movies are like hard to watch. There are elements of this movie that like it's not a fun time. I know that probably goes without saying, but if this subject is of interest to you, I would highly recommend it. There really is no other film that deals with this subject this way that I am aware of, but it's not light viewing, obviously.
No, 100%. And, of course, this is now the second time I've reviewed this movie for a podcast, right? And once again, I mentioned how a lot of things have changed. I think in general, though, that if you can stomach the brutality in this movie, and of course, it isn't very much a slow burn movie. It is 95 minutes, but it takes its time basically the entire way. So if that's not a kind of movie you want to watch, that's totally understandable. That's not for everybody, right? But if you want to see a movie that I think humanizes these individuals in a way that a lot of media would just, we were talking about how like one guy would just pound his hand on the table like, you better not do a motherfucking hunger strike. He's like, but I want to, and it'll work. And he's like, it won't work. Like, but if you want to see a movie that has like humanity and like stoicism and like just once again taking its time and showing characters, I would say in a realistic but not hyper exaggerated way, because even like the brutal evil characters, like they're banality of evil type characters. Like, let's be real here, they're not like mustache twirling villains, they're not like the prison guards in, what was that, Dragged Across Concrete or something like that, or not Dragged Across Concrete, Brawl in Cell Block 99, that's it. Like those guys are like mustache twirling fascist like fucking prison guards, whereas these guys are just literally normal guys who during their day job just brutalize an occupied population.
Who probably do not consider themselves fascists. They just think they're just going to do their job, which, without getting too, melodramatic about it, is scarier.
Yeah, exactly. Like, really, the only overtly political symbolism you see from the prison staff is, once again, the UDA tattoo on that guy's knuckles. And then on top of it, Lowen, the guy who gets shot at his mom's retirement home or whatever, you see him have, like, a British keychain. But that's literally it. Like, and that's, once again, that's not told. It's just symbolism. It's basically just, it's shown, not told.
Which is like the whole movie. It's a show but don't tell movie.
Exactly. One more thing I wanted to mention about Bobby Sands' life, right? But, with Bobby Sands, he grew up in County Antrim, which I don't think is near, okay, it's right next to Belfast. But anyways, he grew up in a place called Rathcooley, which was and they talk about it in the movie, they just, during the pre-scene, it's very just glossed over. Obviously, an Irish audience would get that, but not an American audience, right? But he was basically like ran out of his housing development growing up due to the sectarian conflict. So this is somebody who grew up in a time where he couldn't even live somewhere without having like unionist psychos in the government trying to kick him out just simply for his identity. Like, this is somebody who was objectively colonized in every way possible. So of course he was going to fight back somehow. Like,
there's no what other option do people have when you do that to him? Which gets back to Palestine. Like, regardless of what you think of the IRA or of Hamas, not that these are one-to-one comparisons, but all of this shit that's like, well, are you going to decry Hamas? Well, it doesn't matter, because as long as people are being degraded in this way, if it wasn't Hamas, it would be another group like them. Until these people are allowed to live with dignity, there's going to be groups like that, whether you denounce it or not.
Yeah, 100%. And like, it's one of those things where, I mean, to be fair, obviously, Israelis are liars, like all colonizers are, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But like, the thing is that if they really wanted Hamas out, they would let obviously Gaza be free, and they wouldn't obviously have them under occupation and now just straight up genocide. But they would let them have fucking free and fair elections, because the truth is that Hamas won basically in a sham election in 2006, and Gaza was stuck that way until fucking October 7th. Like, that's the thing. Like, a lot of people don't know about that. Like, they were allowed one election that Hillary Clinton talked on candid video about, talking about wanting to like interfere in that election. Yeah. And that was the only election they got. So like, don't blame them. And on top of it, the only other major political party in Palestine is Fatah, who their chairman is Mahmoud Abbas, who's maybe the most corrupt person to ever exist. So they don't have any good political options. I don't really know what to tell you. Hamas is their best political option.
Yeah, but also beyond that, even there is no other option for the people that are there. And that's not even saying that, like, it's not about Hamas being good. It's about how do you expect people to react when they're forced to live when they're colonized and brutalized in that way. Of course, they can go on hunger strikes, like, you see in our subject this week, but does that work most of the time? No.
It absolutely fucking doesn't. But yeah, so that is Hunger. Now let's get into our pluggables here. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, please follow and subscribe to us on both our Spotify and our YouTube channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Of course, our good friends Scott, Sean, and Robert are creating a fantastic little series. They have one episode done, but they need obviously our monetary and moral support to get the other, I believe, 9 episodes done. So please donate to them. They're great friends of ours. And as well as always, our promise to you that if you just, send us a message on, our freaking email or on YouTube, just send us a message and show us proof that you donated to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. We will, within reason, match your donation. About $25. We will not donate, $1.95 million, the budget of this movie. We will not. If you donate that, you're shit out of luck. I don't know what to tell you.
But we will both donate each about $25 if any of our viewers can show us that they donated because of us, of course.
Exactly. 100%. All right, Brian, you got some pluggables as well as always?
Yeah, of course. Follow us at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and Threads. Of course, the 2 accounts are tied. Argue with me about movies. Argue with me about my bad takes. Send me cringe generational shit. It's everywhere. I see so much cringe millennial stuff. It makes me want to blow my fucking brains out. No cap. And also, please follow the Millennials Are Old Facebook page, which again, mostly is just me following and keeping tabs on various, mostly sweet, but sometimes unhinged boomer pop culture groups.
Yes. Honestly, Brian, I'm so excited to see that when we get to it. Will we get to it, Brian, on our final Billy Jack episode?
I gotta start stirring the pot in there again, because those people were fun.
Oh my God, I'd be so fucking excited to do that 100%. All right, but yes, with all of our pluggables out of the way, and you know what, Brian? It's one of those things, right, where, of course, this movie's called Hunger. I think I want to go to bed, but I'm not going to go to bed hungry. I'll be hungry for liberation, of course, but I'm not going to go to bed hungry because it's not a really good way to go to bed, if you know what I mean, right?
Well, to be honest, as a millennial, I'm about to turn 33 years old this week. I'm in my studio apartment. I'm looking at my George Clinton and Black Flag posters I have up on my wall, and I am for dinner going to make myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because this movie has got me feeling some hunger. And my mommy sent me some cases of preservatives, including homemade applesauce and jams, and I'm going to make use to them, which I gotta say the protagonist of this week's film maybe should have done.
You know what? He might have, but considering he did not, he will always remain in history as a cool guy.
I think maybe he'd still be alive if he had eaten some preservatives that his mom gave him.
Maybe he'd be one of those cringy Facebook boomers that you could argue with.
That's the difference between boomers and millennials. Is I'm never going to forget to eat my dinner. There's a whole movie where this guy forgot to eat his dinner.
We're really the South Park of the nationalist unionist struggle. We're giving shit to both sides right here.
I mean, seems like he gave a lot of shit in this movie, right?
Yeah. All right, well, speaking of shit and hunger, not those two things related. I want to be very clear. I'm not like that. But have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight. And once again, if you see some imperialist loser on the internet, tell him to fuck off. So have a good night, everybody.